Hello, everyone, and welcome back to So This Happened, the podcast where we look at the most important stories at the intersection of content, commerce, and technology. This is our second episode, and I think we've got some pretty good stories this week. But before we get started, Natalie, how have you been? How's your week been?
It's been a really eventful week, of course, because we've had the World Cup.
We sure
And
have, yes.
we've had the, really aggressive game between Argentina and the UK and then
England. Don't let the
England.
don't let the Scots hear you say
England, the
that.
Wolves and the Scots would not like that. And the Scots
No.
are much beloved in the US right now because
they
of their
sure
fan
are.
base. So yes, England and Argentina had a pretty scrappy game. And then, of course, we had the England France final last night. And the thing about being it in the UK is, of course, everyone just throws themselves in it. It's a very loud and it's a very
Well,
community
I was going to say, because I have not been watching them because I'm just not that interested, but I always know what's going on because I can hear what's happening and this is goes back to like as long as I've lived in London, you can hear what's happening. Yeah. And during the England Argentina match the other night, I could hear, like, as soon as they scored a goal, I could hear cars beeping and people cheering, and I was like, oh, something's happened. So I went on the BBC and looked
I
to
love
see.
it. I love
Oh no,
going
it's
to
the
pubs
vibes are
and
great.
bantering with everybody, and everyone gets really into it. I was there with my friend Maria. She was going for Spain. We all had our colours on us. We were just rah.
Well, I have a friend in New York who went down to watch the Spain Argentina match. No, sorry, not Spain, Argentina, Spain, and who were they playing? France.
Yeah, Spain,
Yeah,
France.
Spain and
Yeah,
France. Oh,
I
sorry,
was
it
going
all
for
blurs
France.
together.
Maria was going for
Well, you are French,
Spain. I
so
was in
that
blue.
makes
She was
sense.
in red. It was a wild night.
So my friend went to watch the match in New York with his Spain scarf on. He was going to go watch it in a French restaurant that is near him, and I was like, "Yeah, good luck with that. That feels risky."
Hilarious.
I know, but anyway, so the big final tonight, go Spain. I will cheer for Spain. I'll join Maria in that one.
I'm now switched because, of course, France and England was last night. Have to say that was a difficult one for me, but
that's true.
today is clearer. It's Spain.
It is
Go
absolutely Spain. No one wants
Massacre
Argentina.
the Argentinians. Come on.
Exactly. I think we are all on board with that. Okay, well let's quickly remind everyone of who we are before we really get into
football.
This is not a football podcast. We would probably make a lot more money on this if it was a football podcast. So I am Jess. I'm a partner at Atonic and the co-host of the Early Adopter podcast.
I'm Natalie Lethbridge. I set up and founded Atonic some time back, but Atonic focuses at the intersection of content, creative and cultural content, and technology and monetization and transformation.
So as always, there is so much going on every week. I think maybe it'll quiet down, but even during the holidays, it never does. So let's get into our stories of the week. So our first story is, and I know you are going to be very excited about this one because this is like the intersection of many things that you are passionate about.
Yeah, intersection of my life, really.
Yeah, exactly. So Australia's Prime Minister has said that tech companies will not get free use of Australian books, music, art, or news to train AI models. He has ruled out a text and data mining exception, which is the legal loophole that most AI companies have been pushing for in other markets. So he's quite sneakily closed that loop. And he's backing it up with a new Office of AI and a formal review of copyright law. Also, and this is very interesting, any AI investment in Australia, that means infrastructure, so data centers, etc., now has to come with a social license and licensed access to creative work. So very interesting move from the PM of Australia.
So this is not new to Australia. Australia, it's small, but it's impactful, and it loves to legislate on really nuggety social issues. It held a court case in which platforms were made to pay copyright fees to news organisation, and News Corp Australia has really benefited from that from a revenue perspective when Facebook was just taking and not paying for news content, as it then was, of course. It was the first last year to jump in and legislate in terms of age boundaries for social media. It's got a history of legislating for things that they believe have social impact, and this is a key one. And it's fascinating because it's tying AI investment and AI infrastructure investment to social impact, which is a first really
Mm.
direct tie-in. It is interesting also because it's also talking about copyright and creators in a way that hasn't been talked about now. So it's tying tens of billions in AI and data center investment to a licensing values issue. It is saying that artists and creators of works should own the value of that work and it needs to be remunerated accordingly. And if you want to deploy large models or operate data centers in Australia, you need to be respectful of that and access creative and use output within a licensable or within a monetization model, within a business model, is the cost of entry. It's not just an entitled, as you would say, a negotiating footnote.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me that is really interesting is that this is very much a rejection of the TDM exception. So that, again, the TDM is the text and data mining exception. Usually that gives AI companies the legal right to use copyrighted material without payment,
Yeah,
but Australia is
yeah.
very much saying absolutely not, which I think is totally the right move. I think that's been the biggest pushback that we've had from creators across the board. And we're keeping in this context, the definition of creator is really open. It's not creator as an influencer, it's creator as in musician or artist or publisher or anything. So I think that this TDM exception is one of the most interesting points from this that I think a lot of countries are going to be looking very closely at.
Well, when you look at the role of AI and content generation and how it's really going to enable that at scale, um, what the Australian government, Albo, as the Australians call him, Albanese, is saying is that authors, musicians, and media organizations are core to national culture and identity. And you hear me talk a lot about this, the
Yeah.
sovereign identity and the issue of protecting that. And he's promising enforcement tools that let the individual creators challenge AI companies without needing to fund a major legal case. So what he's doing is empowering the creative
Mm.
community to actually assert their right to be remunerated for works that are their original works. And that is an important move forward. It's a different approach to any that we've seen to date.
I think that's going to be of particular interest to both the UK and Europe, where the creators have really
For
kind of
sure.
come
For
down
sure.
very hard on this. But I think there was one of the AI companies had proposed a fund rather than individual cases, like a pooled payment rather than individual deals. And I think on the surface that sounds a lot easier, but I think the creators have quite rightly pushed back on that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the challenge there is, you can have a collective licensing system. What you don't want it is to have commoditized pricing
Yeah.
around your licensing. And I think that's why the creators are pushing back. So they'll have to come to a balance between what's practical in terms of the volume of content being produced and disseminated in AI and used also for LLMs versus not creating a commoditized monetization of AI, which would devalue
Yeah.
ultimately creative content.
As a whole, a lot of countries are going to be looking very carefully at how this works out. Obviously, we've seen it with the social media bans that countries, particularly in Europe, have really copied what Australia has done here. So I think this is going to be a really interesting one to keep an eye on, because I can absolutely see other countries using this as a blueprint for
Yeah,
their policy.
it's a really interesting playbook, and it's one that I think you're right, UK and Europe are going to be looking at. And tying it into a framework that is also a one that deals with energy, social impact, data
Yeah,
set.
we didn't even talk about that. That I think is by far the most interesting part of all this as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. And when you think of the pushback at the moment
Mm.
on data centers and the cost that they have to the environment, to water and potential rates, this is quite an interesting approach. It's saying you AI infrastructure builders, data center owners, put back into the environment and into the local community what you take out of it. So water rates,
Yeah.
electricity, energy G rates, it has to be cost neutral to the community, which is a very important thing. And equally for creators, it has to be cost neutral to creators, and they have to be enabled to be able to go and produce work and be remunerated for their work. This is the foundation of that philosophy. Really interesting
Well,
and one to watch.
also, just one last note on this before we move into the next story. Two of the main pushbacks that the general public has about AI is environmental impact and water usage and creator compensation. So I think this actually just ties this all in a really nice bow.
It
And
is
it's,
very clever.
yeah, very clever. So definitely one to watch. And I'm sure
So
that this
no free
is,
pass for
no.
LLMs, no free pass for AI infrastructure. It all works together.
Yeah.
Let's see how it works in practice and what that means.
Well, this actually brings us really nicely to our next story because Australia is very much focusing on policy. Over in the US, the book publishers, we've got another lawsuit story. The book publishers are already in court. So, a coalition of major book publishers, including Hachette, Cengage, and Elsevier, plus an author called Scott Turow, have filed a class action against Google in New York. The claim is that Google used millions of copyrighted books supplied under a limited license for things like Google Books and Google Scholar. So for really specific use cases, Google used that content to train its Gemini AI models with no new permission or payment involved. So basically it took all of those licensed books that it did pay for and used it for a completely different unapproved purpose.
So we know that in the US, litigation is what is replaces
They
legislation. That's
love
how
it.
you can get it.
Love some litigation in the
And,
US.
and uh, it- it's a strategic tool. And Go publishers, because they've been hanging out to Go for Google for some time because of the challenges to the monetization structures and the exemptions that Google got 25 years ago. So this is a really interesting case. The publishers are arguing that Gemini just doesn't just use their books, they replace them.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one to defend against because that, in effect, by doing all of their replications and the ability to actually, source and find them through Gemini.
Well, I was going to say it was a discovery tool originally, and it's fine from a discovery tool perspective because it's not outright replacing it. Now they're looking to outright replace.
Yeah, well, summaries are considered outputs that actually replace. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. And that's, if you think about where AI is going, this is a big deal.
The other interesting part of this is that publishers aren't just asking for damages. They want Google to destroy the unauthorized training data, which is incredibly interesting. This would essentially force a hard reset on how AI models are built in the first place. So they're seeking statutory damages, permanent injunctions, and a court order requiring Google to destroy any copies in training. They're essentially asking Google to untrain Gemini. I don't even know how you would technically do that. I'm sure it's possible, but that's a huge ask.
It is a huge ask. And, if you think about what we talked about a few weeks back on the German legal case, there's a bunch of basic structural gaps between how Google's using content, how it's licensing content, how it perceives its AI training rights, and the impact it's having, and what the law is saying at the moment. And this lawsuit is really forcing the foundations of that into the open, so that if you, it's been running stuff on news for some time, summarizing news outputs, where it plays publishers for curated panels, limited paywall access. But for AI training, almost no book or news publishers has an explicit deal to date. So the license that got content into Google books didn't extend to training Gemini, and Google hasn't gone back to fix that. So
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a challenging one for Google.
Well, some publishers are now talking about delisting from Google search if there's no licensing deal, which
Yeah.
is a
Well, I mean, we're going to see
huge, yeah.
the AI's tools that we use today look very different in a year or less time as this plays out, because we've had a kind of a Wild West free for all. And for the consumer, it's been, oh, wow, look at all this great content. And actually, two things are going to change. It's going to cost a lot more money to get the same amount of information as tokens
Yeah.
become more and more expensive. And two, the content's just not going to be available like it was
Yeah.
because these lawsuits will start to take effect.
Well, it's going to definitely, if Google has to untrain Gemini, that's going to cause a huge knock-on effect for Google. It'll be, again,
Google
another,
and others.
yes, Google and others. Yes. Good
Google stands, others
point.
stand aside.
Yeah, very, very good point. Well, also, I'll put the link to the German court case that we were just talking about with Google in the show notes as well, because we covered that on So This Happened a couple weeks ago, and that's actually an extremely important legal case. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Well, another interesting story about the publishers in general is that they are also building their own alternatives to Google. So let's talk about, and I say that very loosely, it's obviously not a direct competitor to Google, but let's talk about what Ozone and European Media Market are trying to do. So we've got
Lovely.
two really big moves this week in publisher alliances. So Ozone, which is a UK publisher collective started by The Guardian, News UK, The Telegraph, and Reach, has signed major US publishers, including The Wall Street Journal, BBC News US, and CNN. And it is repositioning itself as a transatlantic platform for brand and performance budget. So that's where we're coming in with the Google alternative here. In general, since it was founded, it's driven more than £400 million in incremental spend back into UK publishing. We also have 10 European companies, including Deutsche Telekom's Ad Arm, Vodafone, Orange, Experience, Vinted, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, so apologies to our German listeners, Kleinanzeigen, which they have all launched the European media market, which is explicitly designed to pull ad spend back from Google and Meta. The pilot for that kicks off in September across the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. So essentially, we're seeing two alliances of publishers, both in the UK and the US and across Europe, that are trying to claw back ad spend from Google and Meta, which I think both of us are thrilled to see. This is great news.
Well, there's a couple of things here. We talk a lot about building marketplaces and building alternatives to the stronghold that Google and Meta have on the digital ad revenue. So competition is a good thing. And there's two aspects to that competition. One is competition because of its own sake, but also there's the payaways that go outside of Europe and the UK back to the US and never go back into European and UK production. So that is a major
stat
issue.
about £400 million going back into the UK publishers. I didn't know that. I didn't know that number about Ozone. That's a huge number. That's
It's a
brilliant.
great model. It's a great model, and it's only the start, really. But it is about owning what's happened over the last 25 years as the infrastructure, and certainly in relation to the ad industry, that there's been so much value that's been extracted and moved away from Europe because of the fact that the pipes and the trading tools were owned by US companies.
Well, let's quickly talk about, this isn't the first publisher alliance that we've seen. It's not like this has never been tried. Why do we think Ozone has succeeded as a publisher alliance versus some of the other ones that have folded? There was one called Pangea, which ran from 2015 to 2019.
Yeah, I think the failure has wizened people, and I've been also part of publisher alliances that have failed in the streaming space, partly because of competition concerns. In this case, I think Ozone struck because it really looked at its data layer, and it wasn't just about scaling. It was also about how you deal with the shared data and the power of that shared data. That's structurally a different thing, and that is important. How do you understand and bundle inventory within that is another thing. And I think they've got a lot smarter. The technology is probably better. It's a really, also the other thing that I think is unique here is the fact that the telcos have embraced this.
I was about to say, I think
they are very important in this.
I think if we're looking at it from the data layer perspective, this is where the telcos really come into it as well, because The European marketplace combines telco identity data, retailer purchase intent data, and publisher inventory. So that alone is creating a different data layer than anything that has existed before in a publisher alliance situation. So Klein and Zeigen, again, apologies for our German listeners, they have over 1 million daily purchase searches alone, which is huge when you start to combine that with the publisher inventory as well. Vinted operates in 25 markets. Like it's really a scale that I don't think we've seen before with any publisher alliances.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, there's a few things about that. We know that the European Commission is already looking at forcing Google to
Mm-hmm.
break part of its ad technology business. That's regulatory tailwind that these alliances haven't had before, and that stands behind them
Yeah.
at a time when I think the regulators in Europe understand much better what the impact is of what's happened in the past and what they need to structurally cater to in the future to make sure that there is a proper competitive environment for advertising. And then previous alliance efforts happened, where there was where you had a different view of what
Mm.
platform dominance made. If Google is forced to open up parts of its ad stack, the alternatives become more viable by default,
Yeah.
and they become.
Especially in Europe right now where everyone is looking for an alternative to
Yeah,
the Google
there's
and Meta.
definitely a lot of visibility over
Yeah.
sovereignty and the risks imposed by having such a heavy reliance on US platforms.
One other aspect of this that's really interesting is that Ozone CEO has already said that he wouldn't rule out the alliance negotiating AI licensing on behalf of publishers. So obviously that's exactly what we were just talking about with both Australia and with Google. So
Yeah.
I think that's a very interesting aspect of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. If you have a collective data layer across premium
Mm.
publishers, you also have a collective leverage, which is exactly what they talked about in licensing negotiations with AI companies. Both of those, with a commercial structure behind it, is 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 really pushing through a rethink on the balance of power between the platforms, the distribution funnels, the AI platforms, and the creators themselves, and the business model that will ultimately prevail between those.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about AI licensing and copyright and publishers and all of that. Let's move on to some other interesting stories. Have you ever heard of Whatnot? I'm very curious about this because we talked about Whatnot a couple of weeks ago, and so this happened. And over the course of the last probably 2 months since we talked about it, I am seeing it everywhere. In fact, a lot of the podcasts that I listen to are now being sponsored by Whatnot. So, do you know what Whatnot is? I'm just curious.
Me,
Yes.
yes, I've only recently come across
Yeah.
it, an awareness of it, and I
Yeah.
am kind of stunned that there's this kind of stealth,
Yeah. I mean, it's huge, but
huge
also stealth.
space
Yeah.
between
Okay.
it
So
the
we've
decks.
danced around this. Okay. So Whatnot is the largest live shopping marketplace in the US and Europe. This particular story is that they have acquired a machine learning startup called Shaped that builds real-time recommendation and search systems for commerce platforms. So the reason this is interesting and the reason why I wanted to flag this story, because again, we like to talk about stories that fly under the radar a little bit, right? So this is very
Yeah.
much one of those stories. The reason this matters is because of an inventory problem, right? So on a standard e-commerce platform, a product listing will sit there for weeks. So if you think about, Amazon product listings will be there for probably years. On Whatnot, because remember it's live shopping, a show might only run for 2 hours or an auction might close in a few minutes. And the inventory of what's available is constantly changing. So getting the right thing in front of the right buyer before it's gone is incredibly difficult, and it's all about that real-time matching, and that is very, very, very difficult and not what you typically have to deal with e-commerce recommendations. So the purchase of Shaped gets Whatnot much closer to that point, which is super
Uh,
interesting.
I find it quite mind-blowing actually
Yeah.
because it's sort of it's powering up content commerce that we've spoken about many times in a very significant way.
Yeah.
Um, so live commerce has consistently, I think, underperformed versus what's happening in China and in Asia.
Yeah, very much so.
And I even when TikTok first introduced TikTok
Mm.
Marketplace and TikTok Shop on a trial in the UK, it didn't run so well, and part of the reason that people said that is because the way that stories are told and responded to and interacted with in Asia is not, and China is not the same as in Europe. Whatever it is, this is coming one step closer to it all. It's the volume of what it's processing. So it's processing 500,000 hours of live
Which
videos a
is
week on
mind-boggling.
and claiming a 60% share. That's the thing that I went, "Oh,
This is
60% share
clearly there's a
of
demand for
live
this, but
commerce."
no one is talking about it.
Well, it's I'd understand if it was happening in North America, but it's happening in Europe, and
Yeah.
it's only recently become visible to me.
Yeah. No, I mean, same here. Literally in the
60%
last
has only recently become visible to me. That's weird.
yeah,
It's a different conversation.
very
This is
much
not
so.
just a niche thing. This is a big, and
No.
it's not its original niche collectibles kind of DNA either.
No, because yeah, originally it
It's
was very
real
much
live content commerce.
yeah. No, it's extremely interesting. We're already kind of seeing this a little bit with eBay and Poshmark because those are not too. I was going to say they're not too dissimilar, but they are quite dissimilar because again, it's coming to that what we were just talking about with listings on. I put something on Poshmark probably a year ago, and it's absolutely
Really?
still sitting there. Oh yeah, and I put no effort into selling it, but that is very different than having that real time discovery that you would need in a live shopping environment. So I
Which has
think,
seconds to
yeah, exactly,
connect and
exactly.
transact with. And
Because,
you're under a pressure buy kind of
yeah.
situation, yeah.
So really, when it comes to like getting the right product in front of the right buyer reliably, that is what's going to win here. And I think that was one of the reasons for this purchase in the first place.
So you've got that recommendation layer, which is critical, which is moving at speed, and the pressure to buy. But the thing that's interesting also is that the category expansion that they're
This
having.
is
This is what
very interesting.
your data was revealing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So food is like,
So they have put as of April of this year, fresh meat and fish on the platform. So if you think of it like a fish market where, in Tokyo, they've got that really famous fish market where,
yeah,
tuna
Sydney
goes
too,
for,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So think of it like that. Like you're selling fresh tuna.
From your phone, basically,
It's
you can
insane.
buy and bid for and access fresh food, fresh fish. I mean, which is time sensitive in its delivery.
Yeah.
It's kind of a whole new way
I mean,
of doing things. What
it's
happened to the fishmonger? I thought they were protected from AI, but clearly not.
clearly nothing is safe.
Nothing is sacred
Nothing,
here.
not even your fishmonger.
I mean, this is kind of interesting.
Anyway,
And then, what it means, for instance, if we talk about real life applications, is that your recipe video becomes a whole
mm,
different
yep,
experience. And your recipe video when you're sitting there,
yeah.
and the way that that story is told in content in Europe. So, you have, I don't know, who would be someone who's highly visible, whether it's Ottolenghi, and that's my own personal bias, but or Jamie Oliver or
Well,
whoever.
okay, let's look at it like let's keep talking about this food and fish thing. Smithfield's Market, you
Yeah,
know?
they've got a show and they're talking about food and recipes, and they've got someone showing the recipes. You're getting on your phone and you're bidding for what they have immediately and able to access it. And there's a whole procurement and delivery process that hasn't been factored in here, but presumably it's part of it.
Yeah,
It completely changes the dynamics and the interactivity around the content you're producing,
yeah.
and that the audience is watching, because not only is the audience watching it and engaging with it, it's actually transacting with it live, which is what you and I have been talking about for some time.
It is
And
the
this
definition of content commerce.
definition, and it's like it's happening now. And
Yeah,
this kind of this company has come in and just kind of whatnot, boom,
yeah,
it's there and it's
yeah.
enabling it.
So
It's going to be interesting to watch, and obviously on social feeds and on YouTube. Will that be adopted by YouTube? I don't know, but what's not is what's not.
yeah,
So let's see what happens.
this is definitely one that we will be following because I think both of us
New
are,
definition of live commerce.
yeah, very interested in whatnot as a whole. And speaking of platforms deciding they want to own the whole experience, our friends over at TikTok, they're announcing something every other, well, not even every other week, every other day, it feels like at this point. So
Yeah.
they're we've talked a lot about TikTok recently, and this is part of the reason why, is because they have so many major announcements that actually kind of seem like just their feature announcements, but when you start to build them together and see them kind of stacked on top of each other, it really, I think it was a couple weeks ago, we covered an article about TikTok as a super app. And I'll put that link in the show notes because this is very much part of that play. So TikTok Shop is piloting a managed services program that turns TikTok into a full stack e-commerce operator for participating brands. Under the pilot, TikTok takes over most of your shop operations. So that's everything from marketing, automated ads, listing optimization, creator hiring, content production, including hundreds of AI generated videos per brand. That was part of an announcement that they had at Cannes around their new AI generated videos. Um, so you as the brand still list your products and you still take care of the actual practical, like sending samples to influencers, but TikTok handles everything else. So the price is a 10K flat fee plus 10 to 20% commission per sale. So that is very important there. And the rollout will start in August of 2026. So this is just further examples of TikTok really owning that super app model.
So the super app, I think, is a really interesting thing, and
Yeah.
let's hold on that a moment because this is the next wave of activity. You know, you have the LLMs building the foundational infrastructure, and then you have the super apps. And just recently, the UK announced one funding of one super app to aggregate a lot of your apps that are going to be using your AI automated models, so powered by AI. So the ad revenue builds a media platform that we've
Mm-hmm.
talked. But the managed services, that is where people think that a lot of the money is gonna be made, aggregating and
Yep.
building managed services. And if you look at Asia, you can see because that's all about take rates. That's all about
Yeah.
being the middle person or the middle app and aggregating things and making things happen in a way, making it easier for for consumers to actually navigate what is gonna be just a huge plethora of activity and requirements and businesses, not just individuals. So that's how WeChat and Douyin actually became powerful. So revenue is dependent on attention. Take rate economics means you make money on every transaction that runs through you. So that's the marketplace kind
Yep.
of model, and regardless of what ad rates you're doing. So you're not dependent on the fluctuation, you're dependent just on the take up. And it's a transactional fee.
Yeah.
It's the old, referral fee model, but
Well,
it's
if
blasted out of into a whole different
if you
level.
apply even 10% take rate to their overall numbers, it's incredibly important. It becomes much more than just an ad product that they have been. I'm so curious about like whether the people who work at TikTok, because I know a couple of people that work at TikTok. I'm so curious if they understand the bigger picture stuff of what TikTok is doing. I wonder if they're so in the weeds on what their, day to day is, they're not like connecting the dots on what TikTok is doing. I'm
I think
really
it
curious
depends on
about
where they're
that.
seated, because if they're in China, they're already seeing Douyin and
Yeah.
what's happening to
No,
Douyin.
these guys are not. These are in
They've
Europe.
looked at
Yeah.
Douyin becoming a dominant commerce layer by
Yeah.
becoming the place businesses run from, not just sell through. And so that is exactly where TikTok wants to go. But if you're here, you haven't seen that
Yeah.
in Europe or in the US. So yet, I will
Yet.
say a big Y to yet.
Also, not everyone is looking at things in the way that you and I are looking at
Well, we
these
have
things
that
as
luxury. We
well.
have that
We do.
luxury.
We do.
Um, but,
Yeah.
TikTok hit 30 billion GMV
Yeah.
globally in the first half of 2026.
Yeah.
As you say, 10% of a blended rate of that
Yep.
means it
That's
matters to them.
substantial. Well, I think the one thing to bear in mind, and again, this is all part of their bigger play, is the more of your operation that TikTok runs, the less you own. We talk about this a lot, like the
Mhm.
trade-off between the ease of having someone run your TikTok shop, quickly, or not quickly, easily for you, versus what you give up in return for that. So if TikTok is running everything for you, all of those creative learnings, the audience data, attribution logic, all of that is staying within TikTok systems. Now, arguably, it's doing that anyway, because obviously this is happening within the TikTok platform, but you are not getting any sight of what they are doing with
Yeah,
your
and if you
products.
layer that into an agentic framework for
Hmm.
delivery and discoverability, and that's got some powerful connotations, right?
Yep.
So on the one hand, you're a small business or an SME and you want to get going, and this seems like a sensible way of doing it because you pay what seems like a sensible monthly fee and you get all these additional services. You don't employ people to do them for you. It's great, right? Marketing and all the other stuff,
Hmm.
data, audience data, attribution logic, all of that stays. You get a little report, just what you need, but ultimately you're completely bringing your data
Yep.
into their ecosystem, and you're completely dependent on that ecosystem. It's kind of recreating the model that was created with Google
Yeah.
25
Yep.
years ago, but at a scale that's much bigger. So, I'd say watch out for this space, but also watch out, about
Yeah.
these super apps, and really ask yourself, is it a super app that's gonna drive you into dependency on one of these
Yeah. I
major
was I
platforms?
was gonna
Because if it
say,
is, if it's
yeah.
or, if it's a TikTok or a Meta super app, then beware. It's not
Short
gonna get
short
money.
term short term gain, long term pain.
Yeah.
I also am so curious about how the agencies are gonna handle this. What do the agencies do in this
You think
situation?
it's gonna disintermediate them completely?
Maybe not completely, but certainly on the TikTok side of things, because an agency is gonna be an awful lot more expensive than 10 grand a month, you know?
Yeah, and, the economics, 10 grand a month, that's an acquisition economics
Yeah,
for me,
yeah.
because that's not gonna stay that price,
No,
presumably.
no, of course not, of course not. Anyway, another one to watch and just further proof that TikTok is really becoming a super app. So that is it for the week. Links for everything that we've talked about are in the show notes. You can find us on LinkedIn at Atonic. That's Atonik. And please tell us which one of these stories you are the most interested in. We'd love to hear your thoughts and encourage conversation and whether or not you agree or disagree with what we are talking about. And I'd love to know which is the favorite story this week.
And we've still got the links through the newsletter
Yeah, and
subscriptions
we are
too, so
still,
you're
yeah.
welcome to subscribe as well, and we'll keep you up to date, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, Jess.
As always, we'll see you next week. Bye.
Okay.